Hi, this is Annette McFarlane here for Brisbane City Council. Normally you'd find me in a Brisbane City Council library running one of their face-to-face sustainability programs. But since we can't use libraries at this point in time and we know people still want a garden, we thought we'd give you some hints and tips that perhaps you can use while you're spending lots of time at home. So I sowed some seedlings, tomatoes. I got a bit carried away, I must admit, and to recap what I've done so far to get to this stage, I took some tomato seed, I put it in little containers with 20 mils of seaweed per litre of water and dropped the seed in and soaked it for 12 hours, and then I sowed it, just pouring it over the top of this mix the next day. I've actually got 10, 11 different varieties here, so I need to move them on to the next stage. This is 5 days after seed sowing, and that stage where we put them into a larger container is called pricking out. So I like to grow my tomatoes in containers right through from seed sowing stage right till fruit picking stage, because tomatoes are very prone to lots of pests and diseases, and I find them much easier to manage, particularly things like root knot nematode, if I grow my tomatoes in containers. So to move these on to the next stage, I can plant some of them, but I can also share lots with family and friends. I'm going to prick them out. I would normally use these smaller disposable or biodegradable containers, but I found that these tomatoes have a really long root system, so I'm upsizing to these what we call forestry tubes. They're nice and long and they'll accommodate the roots that are on these tomatoes. So there are two methods of doing this. You can either pre-fill your forestry tube, and in terms of cleaning these, they're recycled, but I have washed them in, soaked them in disinfectant and then just let them dry. You could wash them in hot soapy water and then dry them in the sunshine. That's a good way of cleaning them and not passing on pests and diseases. And then I've just filled this with mix and watered it. You can see it's still dripping there, so it's really well watered. Now we can just use something like, this is a meat skewer, you could use any sort of thing that you've got at all, a stick from the garden, and we make a nice deep hole right down into that container, because you'll see when I lift out one of these tomatoes, they have a really long root system. It's important, this is the 2-leaf or what we call cotyledon stage of the tomatoes, and it's important to actually do this technique while the tomatoes are quite small. Hold them by the seed leaf. This is the first leaf that the tomato produces, and when you take it out you can see it's got quite a long root system there. So we need to be able to put that into the container without bending it up like this. We don't want it to do a U-turn, we want it to grow straight down. So we gently, using our meat skewer or whatever you've got, pop that into the container and then firm the soil around it, and you can bury it just slightly deeper than it was in its position in the original container, because tomatoes will actually take that treatment and it will help your seedlings stay up upright. Pop it into its container and make sure you immediately put a label in with the variety that you're growing, and that's really important for me because I've got lots of different types. The other technique that you can use is often what we use when we're potting up other materials or pricking out other materials like native tubes or anything that has a really long root system. So what we do in this stage is take our tube, half fill it with our mix, and then just sort of lay it on its side so you've got it half filled on the bottom half there. Then we take our seedling out again, levering it out gently. Doesn't matter if all the soil falls off the roots, making sure that you're holding carefully onto those cotyledons, and then we actually just tip it on its side and just pop it in like that. It's a bit of a tricky technique to get used to, but once you've done it a few times you'll work it out. And then all we have to do is fill up the rest of our container. So I usually like to hold the seedling in place and then top up the rest of the container, and that way you'll see, fill it right to the top. You'll see it's right in the middle. Fill it right to the top, because when we water, remember that potting mix is going to shrink, and so it'll be exactly at the right level. pop in your label again so that you know exactly what this variety is. And of course, in both cases, you would give these a really good water with liquid seaweed, and they can go immediately out into full sunshine. These have been out in full sunshine today. If it's a really hot day, you know, perhaps leave them in the shade until the following day. It's now late in the day for me, so I choose to often pot things up or prick these out in the late afternoon when it's cooler and water them in with liquid seaweed. Tomorrow they'll be standing up, looking fabulous. They'll be taking advantage of the nutrients that's in the potting mix. Just make sure your potting mix is not too chunky, and of course always add some extra nutrition to the potting mix in terms of a good, balanced, complete fertiliser, and your tomatoes will be off and growing. Thanks for joining me.